All right, let's dive in. Today, we're getting right down to the root of our food supply. Literally, we're going to explore the incredible science that makes our crops more productive, more resilient, and it all starts with one tiny but incredibly powerful thing: the seed.
So, what's the big challenge we're facing? Well, it's a huge one. India's population is over 1 billion people, and it's still growing. To feed everyone, we need to produce a staggering amount of food. We're talking more than 250 million tons of grain every single year.
Now, you might be thinking, well, why not just farm more land? And that's the thing. The problem is, India is already one of the most intensely farmed countries on the planet. There really isn't much new land we can start plowing. So that puts us in a bit of a bind, right? The only way forward is to get smarter, to increase our efficiency, and get way more food from the land we already have. So here's our game plan for today. We'll kick things off with the basics of what we grow, then look at the 3 main ways we can improve yields. After that, we'll zero in on how to actually build a better seed, what the goals of a super crop even are, and finally, why the seed itself is just so important. Okay, first things first. Let's get a handle on the crops themselves. I mean, if we're going to improve them, we first need to know what they are, what they do for us, and when they grow. If you think about it, our food falls into a few key buckets. You've got cereals, like wheat and rice. That's our main source of energy, our carbs. Then there are pulses, like lentils and gram, which are packed with protein for growth. Oilseeds give us essential fats. And of course, there are fodder crops, which are grown just to feed livestock. And you can see it right here. On one side, you have rice, a classic cereal, our go-to for energy. And on the other, you have gram, a pulse that's a total powerhouse of protein. They play totally different roles in our diet, but both are absolutely vital. Of course, you can just grow any crop anytime you want. In India, we have 2 main seasons. The Kharif season, that's the rainy season from about June to October, is for crops like paddy and maize. Then you have the Rabi, or winter season, from November to April, which is perfect for wheat and peas. It's all dictated by the climate, temperature, rainfall, and something called photoperiods, which is really just a fancy way of saying how much sunlight the plant gets each day. All right, so we've got the basics down. Now for the million-dollar question. How do we actually get more food from our farms? Well, science gives us 3 major ways to tackle this. Think of these as the 3 pillars of modern farming. First, you can improve the actual variety of the crop, the genetics inside the seed. Second, you can improve how you grow it, things like nutrients, water, and farming methods. And third, you have to protect the crop from all the things trying to get it, like pests and diseases. Now, we'll get to all of these eventually, but for this explainer, we are laser focused on that very first step: crop variety improvement. Because honestly, it's the foundation that everything else is built on. So, how in the world do scientists actually build a better seed? It's a really cool mix of old school techniques and some pretty cutting-edge technology. One of the most powerful tools in the shed is something called hybridization. To put it simply, it's about crossbreeding 2 different plants. The whole idea is to take the best traits from both parents, like, say, the super high yield from one plant and the awesome disease resistance from another, and combine them into one new superior variety. And this crossing can happen at a few different levels. The most common is intervarietal. That's like crossing 2 different types of wheat to get an even better one. But scientists can get more ambitious, doing interspecific crosses between different species, or even intergeneric crosses between totally different genera. The further you go, the trickier it gets, but the basic idea is always the same: mix and match the best genes. Another way to do this is by creating genetically modified crops, or GMCs. Now, instead of crossing 2 whole plants and just hoping you get the right combination of traits, this approach is way more precise. Here, scientists can pinpoint the exact gene for a specific trait they want, like pest resistance, and then insert just that one gene into the plant. Okay, so we know how they do it, but what about the why? What are scientists really shooting for when they create these new varieties? I mean, what does a supercrop actually look like? Goal number 1, almost always, is higher yield. This is the bottom line in agriculture. How do we get more grain, more fruit, more vegetables from the exact same piece of land? Every little bit of extra productivity helps us feed that massive growing population we talked about. But it's not just about how much you grow, it's also about how good it is. And quality can mean different things for different crops. For wheat, you might want better baking quality. For pulses, maybe it's a higher protein content. And for fruits, a huge one is preserving quality. making sure they last longer on the shelf before they spoil. Next up is making crops tougher. I mean, they face threats from all sides. You have biotic stresses. Those are the living things like diseases, insects, and other pests. Then you have abiotic stresses, the non-living environmental stuff like drought, salty soil, extreme heat, or a sudden frost. Creating a variety that can stand up to these things is absolutely critical to prevent massive crop failures. You know what they say, time is money, and that is especially true in farming. If you can breed crops that mature faster, you shorten that whole cycle from planting to harvesting. This is a game changer. It means a farmer could potentially grow 2, maybe even 3 crops on the same land in a single year. That means more income for them and lower costs for everyone. This one's all about versatility. A crop with wider adaptability is basically a tough, robust plant that you can grow successfully in a bunch of different regions and climates. Why does that matter? It helps stabilize the entire food supply. If you have one reliable variety that can handle different conditions, you're not as vulnerable to, say, a bad weather year in one specific area. And finally, we've got what's called desirable agronomic characters. That sounds technical, but all it really means is tweaking the physical shape of the plant to make it better at its job. For a fodder crop you're going to feed to animals, you want it to be tall and leafy. But for a cereal like wheat, a shorter dwarf variety is actually way better because the plant wastes less energy growing along stalk and puts all that energy into making more grain. So when you look at all this science and all these different goals, it really all boils down to one simple, powerful idea. A good quality seed is the absolute foundation of everything. A farmer can have the best fertilizer, the fanciest irrigation system, perfect weather, but if they start with a bad seed, they're never going to get a great harvest. Improving the seed is the first and I would argue the most important step to making sure we can feed everyone. And that leads us to one last thought. We've spent all this time talking about how to build the perfect seed, one with amazing genetic potential. But all that potential is worthless if the plant doesn't get the right support to grow. So the next big question is, now that we've got this incredible seed, how do we feed it? We'll tackle that one next time. Thanks for joining me.